Let me take you back to the days of silent film, when movies were a visual art. Images that move on a screen. Movies, of course. The best silent films didn't rely on excessive title cards to tell their stories, but instead the actor's body language and cinematography. It was like an international language, with your imagination completing the audio portion. Since then, sound design has become a whole art in itself, and these days, that's what the horror genre seems to rely on: loud noises and screams. If it's not that, it's bloodshed and gore. How extreme and disgusting can you get? Either they startle you with a loud noise, or gross you out. That's why silent horror films hold a special interest. They had nothing but the bare ingredients. It's up to your imagination to fill in the blanks and get yourself chilled to the bone. Yeah, many agree that what you don't see is scarier. Now, I'm going to take that literally and talk about the movies that we don't see at all because they no longer exist. That's the unfortunate thing about silent movies and even early talkies. It was before people took film preservation seriously. A movie would play in the theater, and after that, it would go back to the studio where it would be stored in a vault or somewhere, or who knows. For whatever reason, films would be misplaced and lost. And with the highly flammable nitrate film stock, many of these movies would burn. Now that's what you call an interesting horror movie, the kind you'll probably never see, but always wonder about. That's why I'm picking out the ones that spark my personal interest, and maybe yours too. It's Cinemassacre's Top 10 Lost Horror Films. Number 10, The Phantom of the Opera from 1916. Of all the versions of Phantom of the Opera that exist, it's striking to note that the earliest known version ever made is missing. There's very little information. We know the names of some of the cast members, but that's about it. Even if it was found today, it could probably never be as iconic as the 1925 version. Lon Chaney gave a visually expressive and endearing performance as the Phantom, which no others have matched. But I'd like to know what the original Phantom was like. Until someone finds this movie, it'll always remain hidden in the dark and haunting our visions. As it is, that may be the greatest phantom of all. Number 9, The Cat Creeps from 1930. It was Universal Studios' first sound horror movie, which also means it was one of the first sound horror movies ever made. In 2 languages, they filmed one version with an English-speaking cast and another with a Spanish-speaking cast. With their next movie, Dracula, they did the same thing. In fact, the Spanish version of Dracula is a classic in its own right, and many, including myself, consider it to be superior to the more famous English version.
Indeed.
With The Cat Creeps, both versions have disappeared. The only thing that remains is the soundtrack from the English version, and also a few clips, which survived only because they appeared in a 1932 comedy called Boo, which also uses stock footage from other films. You can see it on the Frankenstein DVD, the Universal Legacy Edition. The Cat Creeps took place in an old dark house, a staple of the genre, and it was actually a remake of a silent film, The Cat and the Canary, from 1927, also from Universal. Universal remade the film again as The Cat Creeps in 1946, during their final leg of their classic horror cycle. However, this version was a remake in name only. The plot was different. Hopefully someone finds the 1930 version. If we could see it today, would it stand out as a classic? Or would it be mediocre and forgettable, sandwiched between both the silent and sound versions? Number 8, The Vampire. Vampires are such a big part of the horror genre, we couldn't go without spotlighting one of the early vampire films. I heard about a movie called The Vampire from 1913. Supposedly it was lost until I looked it up on IMDb and found that 3 people have reviewed it. Turns out that's a different movie. So there's at least 2 different movies, both called The Vampire, both released in 1913. The one I'm thinking of was supposed to have been the first British horror film about an undead snake woman. So maybe it's not even a vampire, who knows. According to IMDb, there's several vampire movies made in the 1910s, and many with the title The Vampire. So there's no end to the confusion. Number 7, The Werewolf. When you're talking classic werewolf movies, the first that comes to mind is The Wolfman, the 1941 version with Lon Chaney Jr., but we all know it wasn't the first. There was the 1935 Werewolf of London. I think anyone would agree it's not as good as The Wolfman. Most people would watch it just for the fact that it's the first werewolf movie, or so they think. For the real wolf hunters who want to know, there's a 1913 film called The Werewolf, but it's lost, so you can't see it anyway. The last known print was destroyed in a fire in 1924. Supposedly, it was about a Native American woman who turns into a werewolf to fight against the invading white settlers. I wonder if there was a wolf transformation scene. Would it be a series of makeup changes and cross dissolves like in The Wolfman? Only time will tell if someone ever finds it. Number 6. The Mummy. Of course we gotta throw in some mummies. Every horror fan wants to find a mummy movie that predates the Boris Karloff version. According to IMDb, there's at least 4 older movies called The Mummy. One from 1911, 1912, 1914, and 1923. And other sources on the internet point to several other mummy movies, either called The Mummy or with mummy in the title. Who knows if they actually exist, or if any of them were horror films. The research could go on and on. Hopefully someone can dig up these lost mummies. Number 5. Life Without a Soul from 1915. Supposedly, it was the second Frankenstein movie ever made. The first one, the Edison version from 1910, was long thought to be a lost film, but since then it turned up in a private collection and has been released on DVD. Hopefully we can say the same for some of these other films and they don't all remain lost forever. Life Without a Soul changed some of the names from the Mary Shelley novel, I guess similar to how Nosferatu changed the names from the Dracula novel to avoid lawsuits. My guess is that this Frankenstein movie followed the novel loosely. All we have to look at is this poster with stills that seem to be from the movie. It seems the monster was basic, less bizarre looking than the Edison version, and without as much makeup as the James Whale version. I don't know what to make of it, but it would be neat to see. Number 4. The Golem movies. The Golem was a monster from Jewish folklore. Even though it never reached the ranks of Dracula and Frankenstein, this was a pretty famous monster, having its own share of movie interpretations. The most well-known existing version is from 1920. Here we see a rabbi create the golem out of clay to protect the people of Prague from persecution, but the golem rebels and goes on a rampage. It was released the same year as Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and likewise it's credited as a major example in the film movement known as German Expressionism, where twisted architecture and painted shadows are used to create a surreal, dreamlike atmosphere. In fact, the cinematographer of the Golem was Karl Freund, a pioneer of the moving camera, famous for filming F.W. Murnau's The Last Laugh, and later went on to film Dracula and direct The Mummy. Even though the 1920 Golem is the most famous, it wasn't the first. There was one from 1915 and one from 1917. The same guy wrote, directed, and starred as the title monster in all 3. That probably makes it the first horror trilogy, but unfortunately, this trilogy no longer exists. With the 1915 version, all that remains is about 3 minutes, including a scene where people are running from the golem, who marches around with a dagger in his chest. I've read some sources that say that the movie has been discovered in the hands of a private collector in 1958, but I can't confirm it, and I've found no place where you can actually buy it on DVD or see it in any form, except for these scraps of footage. So it's my guess that they're talking about this and not the full movie. The 1917 version, called The Golem and the Dancing Girl, is 100% lost. Supposedly, it was a comedy, parodying the original rather than being a true sequel. And at last, the 1920 version is a prequel, which misleads many people into thinking it's the first, and since the same writer, director, and actor is attached to all of them, it's easy to assume it's all the same film. That makes it really confusing and further sinks the lost versions into obscurity. Number 3. The first Dracula movie. The oldest existing Dracula movie is Nosferatu from 1922, and even that one was considered lost for a while. But there was a movie before that called Dracula's Death. From what I understand, it was made in 1921 and was Hungarian, which is a shame that a film made closer to Dracula's home would go lost. All we have is this one grainy still. From what we know, it didn't have much relation to the Bram Stoker novel. It had something to do with a girl in a mental institution who's having nightmares about Dracula. Either way, it's the oldest known Dracula movie. However, there is one source that cites an older version. It's called the Vampire Book, the Encyclopedia of the Undead. In the back of the book is a chronological listing of every known vampire film. According to this, the first movie, called Dracula, was made in Russia in 1920. However, it also lists the Hungarian version as being called Dracula and not Dracula's Death. So, I don't know how accurate this is, and I've never heard this film mentioned anywhere else. So, when it comes to Dracula films, here's the story. The Bela Lugosi version everyone knows about. Nosferatu, mostly horror fans know. Dracula's Death, few horror fans know. And the Russian version, nobody knows, because it may have never existed. That's what you call obscure. Number 2, London After Midnight from 1927. Lon Chaney plays an inspector on a murder case who disguises himself as a vampire to catch the criminal. Chaney was his own makeup man and created the look of the vampire. Many photographs survived, and that's what we're looking at now. Isn't that an amazing face? Even though it's supposed to be a disguise, you couldn't get away with something this exaggerated today. This character has sort of become a famous horror icon in its own right. We could easily see this guy sitting alongside Dracula, Frankenstein, etc. It's just a shame we don't have a movie to go with it. The last known copy was burned in a fire in an MGM vault in 1967, along with many other movies from the silent era. The director, Todd Browning, went on to direct Dracula. Lon Chaney was considered for the role of Dracula, but died of throat cancer, ironically with the birth of the sound era. Bela Lugosi, on the other hand, played the vampire part in the 1935 sound remake of London After Midnight, which was called Mark the Vampire. In 2002, Turner Classic Movies produced a reconstruction of the whole movie. It's on their Lon Chaney DVD collection. They put together all the photos and recreated all the title cards based on the original script. This is the closest we can get to watching the real movie, at least for now. It's probably the most famous and sought-after lost horror film of all. But this is my own list, so I need to reserve the top spot. Here it is. Number 1, the Lost King Kong films. The original King Kong from 1933 was the most groundbreaking film of its time in terms of special effects, sound design, and pure spectacle. Many know about the missing spider pit scene. After Kong throws the men off the log, they fall into a pit where they're attacked by spiders and other creatures. The scene was cut and presumably destroyed. Peter Jackson tried to faithfully recreate it using old film techniques, which can be found on the King Kong 2-disc Collector's Edition DVD. So as far as lost scenes go, that makes an honorable mention. But there seems to have been some other King Kong films made in Japan in the 1930s that are now lost entirely. This is a huge shock for monster fans everywhere. Up until recent years, nobody's ever heard of them. Now that the information has surfaced, some remain skeptical. With all the movies that were lost in Japan during World War II, it's definitely possible. This photograph is said to have been from 1933, the same year as the original Kong. But this poster is from a 1938 issue of a magazine in Japan. The poster is for a film called King Kong Appears in Edo. The other piece of evidence is an interview from Fuminori Ohashi, who designed the first Godzilla suit. He testified that the movie was real and he designed the Kong suit. It was supposed to have taken place in Japan's medieval period with set designs that were supposed to be based on German Expressionism. How interesting is that? Just the thought of a person in a King Kong suit fighting insects in front of warped scenery. And does Kong change size? In some of these images he seems to be the same size as a person, and other times he's giant. It's really weird. You know what the weirdest part is? This sort of rewrites history. Just to think that the first Japanese monster movie was not Godzilla. In fact, this was 16 years before. Hopefully one day some more information may turn up, and I'd like to think that all these movies I picked won't always be lost films.